Assetto Corsa Competizione's latest GT4 DLC costs $17.99, which is over half the price of the base game. This has led to some people having a veritable internet forum meltdown, decreeing that it's far too expensive and costly for just 11 cars of DLC. So, in this video, I'm going to be talking about the pricing of the DLC, whether or not it is too expensive or actually quite good value for money, and whether or not you should still get it despite its price. Welcome back to the Gamer Muscle YouTube channel. Click that like button and subscribe if you enjoy sim racing content. So, to talk about this topic, we've got the GT4 cars here. Of course, I did buy this. I mean, I wouldn't be able to talk about it otherwise. And we've got the Nürburgring. We're going to do a little bit of racing. So it's a kind of talk and drive, because I like having a bit of driving action in the background whilst we're nattering on. So let's go. Total default setup. I've not changed nothing here, mate. Not changed nothing. We're just going to talk and drive. So yeah, it's $17.99. It is expensive. I mean, you can't argue that. It's not expensive from the context of DCS or Train Simulator or iRacing, where in fact you have to remortgage your house every time you want to buy a piece of content. But it is expensive from the perspective of someone that's maybe used to more generalised driving games, or even more used to other driving simulators, or the new to simulators, and coming from stuff like Forza or Race Room, or even Project Cars 2, or even actually in some ways the original Assetto Corsa, because bear in mind you are just getting cars here. You do get the skins with those cars, but you are just getting cars and you're not getting any tracks. So that $17.99 does punt our way through, does come across as like, you know, oh, hang on a minute, that's a lot of money for a bit of DLC. Now, the reason why that $17.99 isn't actually so bad is when you actually look at the raw fidelity and quality of each car in that DLC. Every single car in this DLC pack has its own character. It's not a case of Kunos lazily going, oh well, it's a Porsche car model, and that's a Chevy, and that's a BMW, and there's the model, and we've just changed a few variables. Literally every car in this DLC is possibly, if not the best, GT4 simulated GT4 car. Now, you're not going to really notice that difference too much if you are playing on a gamepad. But if you're playing with a force feedback wheel, even something like a G29, you should notice the different character of every vehicle. And when it comes to actually driving those vehicles on the limit and racing them, you will notice you will have to take a slightly different approach with each vehicle and be aware of each vehicle's innate handling personality. Now, they are all GT4 cars. We're not talking about the difference between a Formula 1 car and a go-kart and a track day car. You know, they are all GT4 cars, so they are all still reasonably similar, but they do have defined differences between them, and those defined differences are what I would personally imagine to be the exact same defined differences that you would find in the real-world GT4 cars. After all, this is a simulator. I wouldn't be able to tell you for sure because I've never driven any of these cars in real life, and I doubt I ever will be able to afford to, especially in a race where each lap costs approximately £2,000 to £5,000 to take part in. So, the point I'm making there is, despite that DLC costing $17.99, you can really see that in an objective sense, each of these cars is an incredible high quality car. And you know what, if you're going to jump to the comparisons between other simulators, as I say, this is probably the best GT4 best simulated GT4 cars, just like on another level compared to anything in iRacing. You know, relatively similar to, say, Assetto Corsa. So I guess you could play Assetto Corsa and save money there, but then you've got the whole field of GT4 cars in here, and without going side to side, I wouldn't be able to tell you if these were much better or how much better or worse these were from the original Assetto Corsa. So, simulation value, top notch, despite the fact no one's actually going to drive these in real life. So maybe that's an irrelevant point. The secondary point would be these cars are just absolutely fantastic fun to drive and absolutely fantastic fun to race. Now, you can, obviously I'm racing with AI here, you can race these offline, you can just do offline races, set something up, you know, have a good time offline. The career mode in the Assetto Corsa Competizione is complete crap, but you can just do your own little things with them and enjoy that. I wouldn't say the AI in this is the best. In fact, actually, after playing F1 2020 quite a bit recently, the AI in that is just way more compelling than what you get in ACC. But the AI is perfectly fine, quite engaging, especially if you're not a super high skill level sim racer. You can get a lot of fun out of the AI. But where this really, really shines is for the online racing and the quality of online racing that you get from GT4 cars, and the fact that everything in this game has been bopped pretty much appropriately. I mean, there's going to be some argument over the bopping, the balancing of power. But generally, from when we've been racing online, I've done about 20 hours of driving these GT4 cars now. Nothing really completely stands out as being ridiculous. You can have the server with every GT4 car on there, and you will have really engaging, interesting racing with all the different vehicles, with all their different nuances, with you then having to work out, you know, some cars are going to be slightly slower through certain corners, some cars are going to be slightly better on the straights, so when you're overtaking them and working out how to actually get past them, you know, you have to approach the different cars differently, on top of the individual drivers in those cars and how they're driving them. It's just really interesting, and makes the online racing just much more engaging than what you get if you're just doing a pure single make fixed situation. And I say that from the perspective of someone that generally I prefer just complete fixed class, same car, you know, so you know it's not the car that you're racing against, you know it's the driver that you're racing against. But these are like balanced so well that it's not really that much of a problem, or at least doesn't seem to be that much of a problem from the 15 or so hours that we've spent on it so far. And the other thing that I've noticed with the GT4 cars, which is absolutely superb, again online, is because GT4, the tyres have much less grip and the cars have less downforce than GT3, and they're also just a lot slower. You end up with just much closer racing, a lot more side-by-side racing. In some ways, they're actually harder to drive than GT3 cars because they float around all over the place. It's harder to get more out of them, and it's harder to actually be competitive because the skill ceilings, it's just different because everything's compacted together and they slip around more. But ultimately, it just lends itself to much closer and more competitive online racing with an even wider acceptance of skill levels. Whereas the faster you get in race cars, and especially when you've got the degree to which the GT3 cars are just train track to the road, it kind of, you end up with a very big split in the racing very quickly, with people that get it just zooming off ahead and people that don't get it so much falling behind. With the GT4 racing we've done, we've had so many more closer racing, so many more situations where there's three wide going into a corner, and you know, it's like, yeah, you're like, okay, $17.99 for the DLC on top of the base game, but it's like, well, okay, that is a lot of, objectively, that's relatively speaking expensive for DLC, but by the time you've done 15, 20, 30, 40 died of old age in a sim rig, that $17.99 becomes really good value for money, and it's very similar to the DCS iRacing Train Simulator thing. Is that if you're buying simulated race cars at a high quality or adding them to your library, it's not like something like Forza or some game that just, even other simulators that have thousands of cars, there's so much depth to the physics that you're likely to literally just waste your entire life and many hundreds of hours in the specific cars. So the value for money then increases massively. Another point to mention, I know we're just being really positive here, guys, and this is with sleep deprivation again, so what's going on? Another point to mention is that, again, I was saying before, just the individual car quality, the individual handling, the individual characters, but another aspect that Kunos have absolutely nailed with the Assetto Corsa Competizione, and they did with the GT3 cars as well, the audio is bonkers. Like, the individual car audio, the individual engine notes. I mean, listen to this, Chevy. It sounds like I've got like a screaming banshee. The audio's really round, really punchy. You sounds, it feels audibly like there's a mental engine right next to you and you're in a car with no noise dampening. It's super, super engaging. And super, super immersive just from the audio, ignoring the physics. And each of the cars has their own individual engine sounds, obviously. You know, you don't necessarily get that level of detail, and we certainly don't get that level of detail in most games with most your average sort of DLC for cars. It's like a lot of the time they'll use kind of recycled audio or slightly tweaked audio. Rather than, it sounds like a Kunos engineer sat on the dash in these cars with the microphone. Well, they probably had like 5 or 6 microphones set up, but I like to picture one of the engineers recording the audio sellotape to the dash. It's just the audio experience from this is absolutely mental, absolutely mental. But I'm gonna have to. I have to be negative though to be rounded. We can't just be completely positive. 7th place as always. One of the big problems I do foresee with the DLC, especially with more expensive DLC, and we've already started to see this with the Assetto Corsa Competizione, especially with my hosted races, is that a big issue is that as more DLC comes out, it segregates the online user base, and with the DLC being relatively expensive, there are a lot of people that just simply can't afford $17.99 on a whim for DLC unless they absolutely know they're going to be playing it, which you don't know until you've played something. And then you also have to bear in mind that if you're coming to the game afresh, it's not just $17.99 for this DLC. It's the base game for £30, the track DLC for another £12, £15 or whatever, plus is $17.99. Before you know it, you're starting to spend 60, 70, 80, 90, £100 when future DLCs come out. Historically, Kunos have done complete packs, and often when DLC comes out, they often actually put a sale on the other parts of the game, so it's not too bad if you do buy it in that sale period. And I still think it's good value for money. After all, you're still paying the same price that everyone else paid. But the point is, and the point I'm getting at, is if it's not on a sale period, so like right now, nothing's on sale. When we're racing online, it happens repeatedly that people are like, oh, I really want to join in, but I can't join because I'd have to get not only the game, which I'm happy to get, but I have to get this DLC, I have to get this DLC, I have to get this DLC. And as more and more DLC comes out, it just makes the situation harder and harder, and makes the game, it makes the barrier of entry into the title a lot worse. So, though I personally think the $17.99 price for this DLC is superb value for money, just given the sheer quality of these cars, well worth it for any car fan and any simulator fan, totally worth it for them. It's it is a bit of a high asking price for the more casual, more mass market side for this game, and I actually think in many ways it probably would pay to reduce the price of the DLC, because you will get more sales, which will then offset. You'll get more sales, which then offsets the fact that you've sold the product for less. It's the big thing of selling more for less. So, you know, I do totally understand the frustration that a lot of people have with the pricing of the DLC. I think it's totally worthwhile getting. I think it's good value for money, but you don't want to end up in the situation that you have with games like R-Factor 2 at the moment, for example, where many aspects of R-Factor 2 are fantastic, but the DLC is just all over the place. It just puts people off. The same happens with iRacing with certain race series. There's just no participation in certain race series, or very specific participation, because people have to buy all the tracks, all the cars and stuff. You know, obviously a lot more expensive than this DLC. It's probably an even better example of how badly things can go. And Race Room as well. You know, it's just when you get all this DLC, it fragments everything and it's a mess. So, you know, that's how it is. So, as I say, I highly recommend getting it. Absolutely fantastic. I understand all the complaints. I think the complaints of the price of the DLC are valid. I would hope that Kunos could come up with some kind of alternate solution. Maybe, I think my brainstorming plan is that they should have a DLC that has cosmetics in the form of car skins that are like community special car skins that are entirely optional, and see how many of them get sold. People could still do custom car skins, so it wouldn't affect any of them. You can still use the skins that are included in the game, but I think there would actually be quite a good reception for Jimmy Broadbent Jardier car skins. Like, their entire communities would want to buy a little pack of that just to show their support. This is stuff that's been well demonstrated within like Dota and Counter-Strike, for example, and with the esport nature that Assetto Corsa Competizione is going in, it only makes sense to try and copy those other successful examples. I think, anyway. I'm sure some of you would disagree in the comments. But there you go, guys. That is my thoughts on the pricing of the Assetto Corsa Competizione DLC. What do you think? Do you think it's too expensive? Do you think it's good value for money? It'd be interesting to see in the comments if there's any other good arguments for it being too expensive, it being good value for money, other than the ones I've made in this video. Or you could just smash your head on the keyboard, because, well, that's what I do whenever I type messages on the internet, and that's why my spelling's so bad. But until the next one, guys, thank you for watching this video. Please do click that subscribe button. Please do like if you want to, or dislike if you want to. And happy tea drinking. Goodbye.